take a look at some equations. This first equation we should recognize as a quadratic equation. X squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. The second equation is also a quadratic equation. 3x squared plus 2x equals 0. It just happens to be a quadratic equation that's missing the constant term. 5x squared minus 9x minus 8 equals 0. That's another quadratic equation. And when we recognize those as quadratic equations, we have certain things we're looking for. One of the things we're looking for is we're looking for one of the terms to have the variable to the second power. Typically, we will also have a term that has that variable to the first power. Or another way to say it, this term has the variable, and somewhere in the equation there's going to be another term that has that variable squared. Then, when those conditions are there, and we have no other variables with a higher power, we have a quadratic equation. We have that here, don't we? Here we have a term with the variable to the first power, and another term in our equation has that variable to the second power. No other variables with higher power, we have quadratic equations. Well, now what about this fourth equation? We don't have a term with the variable to the second power. That's typically what we look for to identify a quadratic equation. But do we have the situation where we have one term with a variable to some power and another term with that variable squared? So we have here x to the first power, x squared. X is to the first power here. Here, that variable has been squared, just giving us x squared. What would happen if we took x to the 1/2 power and squared it? Do you remember your rules of exponents? When you take a power to a power, what do you do with the exponents? We don't add them, we multiply them. So this would be x 1/2 times 2 is 1. So here I have an equation where one term has a variable to a power and another term has the variable squared, has that variable squared, just like we have here. Here's a term with a variable. Over here is the term with the variable that is that variable squared. It's just very easy to see it here. It's a little more difficult to see it here because we forget about what happens when you square an exponent. You square a term that already has an exponent, you multiply the exponents. 1/2 times 2 gives us 1. So this equation is not a quadratic equation, but we say it has the form of a quadratic equation. In fact, it's sometimes put in a family of equations that are called quadratic in form. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how we solve an equation that is quadratic in form. And in subsequent videos, we'll look at several other examples of this family of equations.